Please give a warm welcome to Sandhya Suri, writer and director. Thank you for being here, Sandhya. I want to start, I greatly admire the crafts of the film, the way you put it together, especially the cinematography, which starts very objective, you know, very natural. You know, can you tell us about your approach to the look of the film?
Well, it's interesting because coming from, you know, a documentary and discussing the look of a film with a cinematographer, having always shot my docs myself, I didn't really know what to do. So I remember discussing also on the first short fiction I made during the writing process of this. I said, well, what do we do? Do we sit down and discuss lenses or you know, the look of the film and like set some boundaries? And both in this short and in this, you know, I've come to understand about my work that I have to work very organically, and that ultimately it's about what's happening in the scene which dictates those choices. Mm-hmm. Sometimes during the shoot, it was interesting because there was a push-pull between me and the DP of, you know what, he had some ideas which are slightly more stylistic, and interestingly in the edit, even though I tried those out on the shoot as someone coming, you know, to fiction for the first time, ultimately I came back through the edit to the sort of pared down but precise cinematography about it, which sort of is immersive but doesn't draw attention to itself.
Mm-hmm. I was blown away, in particular, the interrogation scene. The camera lingers far longer that the audience will feel that it's comfortable. And, you know, can you tell us about the importance of the camera staying in that scene? It shows all the fury and the struggle between her being female and the male. And I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, it's great you caught onto that, because sometimes I think, like, even with the, you know, even during the development process or the edit, you know, the controversial length of the interrogation was always a subject matter. It was there in the script for a certain length for a reason, because I didn't want to just cut into the stereotypical torture scene, you know, like, oh, and now we cut in and we're beating a man, you know? I wanted it to be banal in a way for the police, you know, mm-hmm. that this is an everyday thing, it takes its time, and to also mark the little moments between men and women, the little struggles that go on before Santosh basically takes a bite of the samosa, which is the turning point. For me, the film is pre-eating samosa and post-eating samosa. So she gets offered this samosa, and she picks it up by her male colleague. She picks it up, and it's like just the image of her glory all greased and crumbed and disgusting underneath on the newspaper. And then on set, Shahana took a bite, which wasn't in the script, which I thought was super interesting, right? She's gonna bite, she's gonna go with it. And at that point, I'd already discussed this with Leonard, the cinematographer, that post the samosa moment, there was a turn in her, or a decision or an inevitability about how this evening was going to progress. And then what I love, what Leonard brought on set that wasn't in the script at that moment, was it was always thought about sound, right? It was always going to be something that was based on sound and staying on her face, because we don't see that much violence, actually. We hear a lot.
Correct.
We hear a lot, right? There becomes a moment where I feel that not showing becomes sort of some sort of weird artistic device, and again removes us from the reality of what is actually happening. So I knew that at some point I wanted to see also. It only felt honest to see at a certain moment. And then when she's beating, he went down instinctively with the camera, with the beat. And actually, I think that was a really smart thing to do and a really honest thing to do for that moment.
What I love about that scene, and it feeds into what I feel about Santosh, which is a fascinating character that I never fully understand her but I gather that she's finding things about herself that she's never experienced before. And in that scene, she's uncovering things that scare her, but at the same time that she has to do. Am I in?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know what the funny thing is when you put that in a script, luckily the script wasn't overdeveloped. There were like 3 drafts of this script, not more. And most of the work was done at the Sundance lab on the very first draft, by which time I'd got it sort of into order. And I think what was interesting about it is that if you look at that at script level, if that were to be overdeveloped, there would be a lot of discussion about why. But why does she do it? But why? But what's the reason? And I kept saying, even though, luckily we didn't develop it so long, I didn't have to argue too long, but it was like, well, you know what? Our motivations as they're just complex, aren't they? And they're multi-layered about why we do the things we do. And so part of it is about what's happening in the space, in that time and space, now and here, which has a sense of inevitability of sort of gang, witness and participant. And then there's also the long trajectory of her grief, which starts from the beginning of the film and, which starts as a simple story of a woman's grief, but which does slowly get politicized by others over the course of the film, the death of her husband, and how those 2 things about her husband and what happened to Devika in the Muslim area of town sort of get merged in a very unpleasant fashion. And so I feel she has been prepped. There is a trajectory of her grief, and there's a reality of what's happening in the room, and there's all of those things.
I'm curious about the fact that, I'm a big fan of Leonard, your DP, Leonard Hillage, and you talked about that there was a back and forth between the 2 of you. The film, for the most part, has this realistic documentary we're observing, but then towards the end gets claustrophobic. He's playing with darkness, etc. Can you tell us about that trajectory of the visuals?
Yeah, that we totally agreed on, that when we were moving into the thriller mode more, like, that's what I wrote, like, let's lean into it, And it was the cinematography was so led by the locations, many of which had actually been almost finalized by the time Leonard was free to come on, to come and do the recce's with us. So, for example, like that hotel that we found where she finds, Salim, like, I was in love with that hotel. I wanted to have my after party there because it was just so unbelievably atmospheric. And I remember the stunt team were there from Mumbai. They're like, oh, we've got to do the fight sequence on the roof first. I was like, no, what we have to do is we have to make sure we get the real people who stay in this hotel to be in their rooms awake while she walks down the corridor, because that's what gives this film its strength. It's not about some amazing fight sequence that I'm going to do, because it's not that amazing. It's about feeling that this is a real place with real men in it. Mm-hmm. And so that all the people who all the really poor laborers who actually stay in hotels, one-star hotels like that, selling their goods because they come from the village. So then it was just about embracing the location, and he's also very instinctive, so you get to a location like that, and he doesn't want to do a great deal. We're going to change a few practicals, we're going to go with her, and a lot of it, I think, is also about the sound, because, I started working with sound design from script stage, writing down everything we were going to harvest, knowing that we were really going to only use like ADR or additional sound as, emergency. And, so we already had all these ideas. What are we going to use in the corridor? The sound is going to open up. She's going to turn a corner, and like the fans are going to come on. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because we had a lot of discussion about the chase of Salim during the edit, where at some stage, everyone starts to get nervous at that stage. Like, it's like, well, we think we need a score. And I'm like, well, no, but I always said there's no score. Yeah, but it's kind of boring. And I'm like, well, it's not. I don't think it's boring, We had this back and forth. I had it like 4 times on four screenings. And And at a certain point, you know, I'm in the edit with my editor. I'm like, you know what? Let's just put fucking Mindhunter on there just to see. I know I don't want it. I just want to know why everyone's so anxious about no score, because I don't feel that anxiety. I feel it's tense. We put it on, like, oh my God. I say, oh my God, look, it's so exciting. You know, like, it's so exciting, right? But then you get to like this sort of mediocre fight sequence. You're like, oh, well, that really doesn't. And they have to cut the music. You're like, that really doesn't help. And so when we went to Cannes, we premiered at Cannes, and I remember, you know, in this great big theatre with amazing sound and amazing image, and I was sat there, and I'd had some sort of neurosis about the film playing too loudly, so I was going to start like that. And then at one point, I'm like, you know, I need to check in with the audience. And I looked in at that moment, and they were really lent in, and I think that's about the lack of a soundtrack telling them what to feel. I think it's about the fact that they're listening as they go. Is there a footstep? Is there something happening? So it was about sound and picture, basically, is what I'm saying in a very long way.
There's a scene between Santosh and Sharma in the cop car, where I'm paraphrasing, where she talks about the theatricality of being a cop. And I was fascinated by the fact that the way you approach the cop scenes, there's a theatricality about it. Can you tell us about the importance of tapping into that aspect?
I mean, you know, Bollywood and the police are like so inextricably linked in so many ways. It's difficult to explain, but you know, Indian cops feature in almost every movie. And many of the cops that I met, I spent a long time researching, had joined the police because of like a Bollywood hero in a police uniform who's in control and, you know, goes and sorts shit out in a bad system, which is the usual story, the good cop in the bad system. So there was part of the idea of that intertwining of those things, and also from the research I spent with the police of watching that theatricality around bribe taking, around power, around what one could or couldn't do to someone. And also, I mean, I saw it myself, like looks darting around a room, which are saying so much. And as an outsider, you're thinking, okay, there's a lot I'm not getting here. There's a lot about who's in charge, who's sending messages to whom, and you know, what is cinema but looks, right? So there was a huge amount of theatricality in policing, and seeing the police, especially the men in uniform and out of uniform, like the time I spent with them, and seeing their real selves and their like cop selves, it just linked with the Bollywood. It really did sum up that, and I wanted to pay a little tribute to that, and also like all the Bollywood films. I thought I had to be addressed.
Well, you addressed the tradition in cinema of cops, but then your film is about a rookie cop that gets thrusted into an incredible situation. We're used to seeing rookie cops that willingly put themselves in this situation. It's so refreshing to see that here's a woman that is thrusted into the situation. She doesn't want to be part of it. Tell us about that aspect and how it taps into the caste system, and also the lack of, I mean, she's a broken woman. She has no rights, and then all of a sudden she's thrusted into this bizarre journey.
Well, it's interesting because Santosh I always imagined as someone a little more complicated than just an innocent housewife. That's why the first thing you hear about her in the film is her mother-in-law, who's clearly like awful, saying that, well, she was like this, she was out spending his money, she's like terrible. And I found it interesting to give that as a first piece of information about Santosh, because like maybe there's a bit of truth in there, I like the idea that Santosh has a hunger and ambition to her that she doesn't even realize until these set of circumstances, arrive upon her. So for me, it was always about a type of woman who you put her somewhere and she is going to watch, and she's going to look at where the river is, where the right place is for survival.
Survival, yeah.
And not just survival, but I think she wants a bit more than survival. I think she actually wants to thrive, because she didn't have to take the job. She could have stayed with her family. No one was going to chuck her out. She wasn't going to be in the street. It was just a very unsatisfactory life course. And there was a hunger, I think, for something more. So she takes the job, not really understanding anything about what it is. Maybe her husband never spoke to her about being a cop before, you know?
Mm-hmm.
She takes it and she discovers a reality and herself in, like, you know, quite a big way. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought up that what I find fascinating about the narrative is that we go through loss. I mean, at the beginning, and then she finds hope in this new job. Then she encounters loss all over again and trauma, and then we find hope, and then there's like, it's so complicated. And then, you know, were you aware of that, the ebbs and flows of her journey, how complex it is?
Yeah, I mean, it's life, right? I just feel like sometimes in cinema we're told we have to simplify things so much, which you do on a through line of a film, but life is just so complicated, and everything can be held, you know, especially if you look at Indian society, everything, there are many cultures in which many things can be held together at the same time without cancelling one another out. You know, Sharma can love her and care for her and all these things, but can also be manipulating her at the same time. I mean, everywhere, right? That's sort of true. Also manipulate her, also sort of abuse her trust.
Yeah, you alluded to, I mean, you may not alluded, you mentioned the fact that she's not an innocent person, and that's what's so rich about this, is the complexity of Santosh. And then you pair her against, you know, Sharma, who's also an extremely complex character. You know, can you tell us about the dynamic of having those two characters face to face?
Yeah, well, I was always interested in a mentor-mentee relationship, and I was trying to figure out some sort of film to do it in. And then when I came up with this idea, very organically, you know, it just sort of emerged. Okay, she's going to have this female mentor, but, you know, relationships between females aren't, it's not just happy sisterhood, you know, it's like, it's complex, like all relations. And I just felt honest to say that, okay, Sharma's this type of woman. She does want the best of her. She does want her to thrive, but she also has a sort of terrifying psychofeminism, which she elaborates upon within that sort of heat moment in the diner, in the, you know, which is very scary, but which also sort of makes sense at that point in the film. Have you seen how everything runs? Like, it also makes sense, but it's also absolutely outrageous. And yeah, and also in the casting of her, you know, we have this figure of the matriarch in Indian cinema a lot, the Don, the female Don, but in the casting with Sunita Rajvat, she brought a lot of humanity and a lot of sort of vulnerability to the role, which I think also helped, yeah, keep it feel real.
There, you know, I've seen the film twice, and there's so many themes in the movie. We deal with race. You deal with the elusive system of justice. You deal with the role of women. Was that always your goal, to tackle so many complex things?
No, not really. It was just about, you know, even coming from docs, I never made campaigning docs. It was not my aim as a filmmaker is to like have a deep emotional engagement with the main character. I want the audience to have a deep emotional engagement with that and be in the film. You know, if I could take you all to that place, and, you know, I want to do it, right? The cinema is a way of traveling for me. So I wanted to just sort of put you there, make the intermediary of the filmmaker as invisible as possible, make it as immersive as possible. And all those themes, it is just sort of the DNA of the film. So rather than a tick list of didactic things that need to be communicated, it was about, okay, it was about a type of place that I know from a lot of time I've spent in India, you know, a type of a straw dogsy shithole town, peri-urban type of little town, where all these things are just sort of normal. It's just sort of, I think it is a lot about the banality of evil. It's a lot about the casual nature of violence and corruption, and a sort of understanding that, like, this is how it is. That's why, you know, I was interested to see, okay, if you take someone like Santosh, who's been a housewife, and you put her in a place like that, then I'm interested in asking questions and learning something myself as a filmmaker. What happens to her? What effect does that have on her? It was about a type of a place rather than a tick list of issues, basically.
But I told you when I've met you earlier that the richness of the film, that is, on the surface, we can enjoy the film. It's highly entertaining because of this, you know, police thriller. But then, you know, for us that want to have a more nutritious meal, there's so much to navigate theme-wise. Is that something that you were aware that, you know, to have this, you know, complex narrative that can please different groups of cinephiles?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not so much one to think, you know, to like second guess what an audience wants so much. It's more about, you know, I'm always using me as an audience to think, I don't want to be bored. I want to be in the story. I want to be with her, right? And I don't want it to be loose or flappy or whatever. So, you know, it came very organically to be a film about the police through many steps. It started off as a documentary that ended up as a fiction because, you know, I had an inspiration based on an image of a policewoman that gave me the idea to tell the story of this type of a place through her. So it started off in that organic way. And then, obviously, now I'm in a police world, and I'm kind of freaking out because I come from documentary, and I'm like, it's the first fiction, and I'm like in a genre now, and like I'm really scared. So, you know, then the whole travel of this film was about how to keep the plot minimally satisfying, like, you know, but leaving enough space for the relationship between her and Sharma and her own personal grief trajectory. So that was always, throughout the whole film, it was about, okay, how to keep it, you know, I'm not going to make an amazing police procedural in terms of clues or anything. And anyhow, you know, I think Paul Auster said, like, it's sort of ultimately always disappointing, the plot. Like, it's never about that, because that's the least exciting thing, finally, in all of it, right? It's always disappointing, whatever the plot is. Maybe in rare circumstances not, but that's what he said, and I quite like that, because I sort of felt it's true, and that's definitely not my forte, to make some, like, convoluted thing that's going to keep viewers on the edge of their seat and not go and make a cup of tea or whatever, right? You know? So it was about keeping a slow burn, you know, that just builds.
But when I was watching the film, the delicious subversiveness from my vantage point was like, this is a male territory. You know, this is David Fincher world. This is, you know, we've seen so many police thrillers that are done by male, but here you are, a female, first time narrative film. Was that back?
No, that's what I'm saying. I love being so ignorant. Like, you know, I wrote my short. It was all written at magic hour. I had no clue how fucking difficult that was going to be, right? I just wrote it because I didn't know anything. Same with this one. I'm writing this thing. There's like 76 speaking parts. There's like stunts. I have no clue because I've not shot a fiction before. So at some level, you write something from the heart. And I did read that also, that it's very rare for someone to like go into this genre, especially with the first film, as a woman. Like, it's not a common thing. I had no idea about that.
Only I can think of Catherine Bigelow. I can think of only a few.
I had no idea, but I like, you know, that's naivety keeps you sane. So
But you were smart enough to know that you know, to travel through Santosh's world. That was, I mean, we enter through her world and we see it through.
She was the starting point of the film. It was always about her. It was always about this woman and staying with her and looking at a woman whose name literally means satisfaction in Hindi. Santosh means satisfaction. It was about a sort of, okay, she's lost her status as a wife, which is a big status to lose in India. She's become a widow, 0 status. And now the whole film is going to be about her search for her status in a society which is all about status and hierarchies and who is above who. And it's just, you know, very rich journey.
Tell us about working. You have, well-known actors working with you, but then you cast a lot of people that have never acted before. Tell us about that dynamic and the importance
makes me
of it.
happy, right? Because I'm a doc maker, right? So that's the type of thing where I'm like, I'll take on that challenge because it feels real to me. Because I have quite a good, although it's all new to me as a doc maker coming to fiction, what I do have is a strong bullshit detector, that kept me very grounded in it. So, I'm looking at these featured extras and I'm thinking, there's just no way that's going to be in, there's just no way we're shooting that scene, with the proposed pool of 10, featured extras. And for example, it's just so much easier to get through the day with someone who knows how to do their job properly. So like the cobbler who takes a complaint, I found that guy doing that, right? I flew him in. I said, it's much better to get this guy to come in because he does that. He's the one through whom I got this story idea, who fixes shoes and who takes complaints. He knows how to do it. He did it so naturally. He's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
What about the mother of
the mother of the girl?
victim?
So she came to me on the first day. We were doing a recce for the police station. She comes up to me. She's totally grinning. I've got my 2-meter high Dutch DP, right? Hello. And anyway, everyone's a bit like, oh, who are these guys? She comes up like totally smiling, super confident, like, hey, what's going on here? She had like a face that looked like it was offered like a Grecian urn. I was like totally struck by her. I said, oh, we're going to cast her. Production were like, yeah, maybe the lady works at the canteen. I was like, no, I'm going to cast her as Vivica's mother. Everyone's like freaking out, but she can't read or write. Like, how is this going to work? We went through the lines together. She didn't need to read or write. She was absolutely brilliant. Like, and she really understood. She really understood. She could feel what that was, So I thought she was great.
There's a question that I've been dying to ask you, and it has to do, total curiosity of mine, about, is there a connection for Santosh between the victim, the young girl that is missing, and her husband's loss?
They do become intertwined. They do become intertwined in terms of grief. But there's also, along with that, because there are always many things happening at once in this film, as you know, there's also the fact that her husband's death does become politicized. She does get pumped up by Sherma as well. Your husband died in this place. You've got to go to this place. How can you move on without justice? So part of it is her feelings about what happens to the girl and Sherma's feminism, which is new and inspiring to her in a way, and the anger at the violence that is perpetrated upon women, that Sherma feels genuinely, I believe, and then so does Santosh. But there's also the fact that about communal divides in India and how the alleged perpetrator of her husband must be Muslim and how this guy's also Muslim and it happened in the same place. So she's manipulated and she has her own trajectory of grief as well.
So it's UK's official entry to the Oscar, but what has it been, curious about its release in India and what has been the reaction in India?
But we have just signed the deal, which is great news for our distribution deal in India. We've had initially, obviously screening in India is like this sort of a very, very important thing for me, and a thing that makes me very anxious being someone living outside of India, because I did all my, I worked so hard to feel that I could show this to an Indian audience. It was never for a Western audience only. It was always at every step of the process meant to be a film that works for both audience, which is a big ask of a film that deals with so many things, right? But like the press response from India has been astounding, really about like seeing our society truly through my eyes, who lives outside of India. They've had a really great response. We screened at Mumbai International Film Festival, went down very well. Now we have a distribution deal, but now I have to face a censor board. Ooh. So, and that's kind of tough because, what the censor board asks you to do is they ask you to like cut a scene here and there. And, I remember also before we shot, we have full permission to shoot the film in India. Like we have to also pass it by the government to shoot as a foreign production. And it was cleared amazingly, right? Amazingly, we got cleared, we got permission to shoot, so we shot. Now, I hope that it's going to be hard for them to come back because they cleared it and we shot what was the script, but you never know. Like, they can turn around with anything. And the problem with this film is that the problem of the film is sort of the DNA of the film. Like, you can't take out one scene and make it acceptable to the government. It's sort of everywhere.
Why was there one particular scene that you were concerned that the censors were not going to clear and then they cleared?
Well, on the cut, no, actually. Well, the interrogation, of course, I was a little worried about, you know, about naming the Islamophobia, which is very well known and part of society, of like naming it so specifically in that scene and so clearly. But they didn't say anything.
Yeah. Well, an amazing film, and thank you for being here. What an honor.
Very much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, everybody.